profits down 89% in a single year. Not a startup, the largest watch company on Earth. For me, this is what makes that number strange. The company wasn't caught off guard, betrayed by bad products, or outsmarted by a competitor. The reason it happened is something older and more structural than any of that. The reason it happened is the exact same reason the company exists at all. The machine that rescued Swiss watchmaking is the machine that put it under pressure, and behind it is one man. He is the reason one corporation has so much power over the watchmaking industry. This is the story. The apocalypse before the rescue. Go back to 1978. Not to the Swatch Group. That doesn't exist yet. Go back to Switzerland, where an entire industry is in the middle of quietly dying. Japan did it. Not with better craft, with quartz. Seiko released the world's first commercial quartz watch in December 1969. The Astron, priced at 450,000 yen, roughly $1,200 at the time. The technology kept better time than virtually any mechanical movement ever made. Within a decade, it had been copied, scaled, and made disposable. By the late 70s, you could walk into a drugstore in Ohio and buy a quartz watch for $9 that kept better time than a Swiss mechanical movement. A master watchmaker spent 3 months assembling by hand. The Swiss didn't see it coming, or maybe they saw it and didn't believe it mattered. Either way, by 1975, Swiss watch exports had collapsed by nearly half. By 1983, the industry had shed 60,000 jobs. Brands that had operated continuously since the 18th century went dark. Names that survived 2 world wars, the Great Depression, and every economic panic in between couldn't survive something as simple as a quartz oscillator in a plastic case. 2 of the most important Swiss watch groups, SSIH and ASUAG, were technically insolvent. Between them, they controlled Omega, Tissot, Longines, Rado, Hamilton, and Blancpain, among dozens of smaller names. Heritage brands. Names that had been on wrists at the summit of Everest, in NASA mission specifications, in the collections of every European royal family. They were about to disappear. The Swiss banks holding the debt called in a consultant named Nicholas Hayek. His job was to figure out what to liquidate. He came back with a different answer. What happened next changed everything. Not just for Switzerland. For every Swiss watch you've ever considered buying. The man who said no. Nicholas Hayek was Lebanese Swiss, trained as a mathematician, and built his career in industrial consulting. He had no background in watchmaking, and that turned out to be exactly the right qualification. Because he didn't look at the situation the way a watchmaker would. He didn't see a dying craft being murdered by cheap electronics. He saw a manufacturing problem with a manufacturing solution. The Swiss weren't losing because their watches were worse. They were losing because their cost structure was insane. Dozens of small independent manufacturers, each running their own components, their own supply chains, their own overhead. Nobody shared anything. Brands that had competed with each other for a century refused to pool resources even while they were going bankrupt together. It was artisanal production competing against industrial production, and industrial production was winning. Hayek's solution was to do what Japan had done, but on Swiss terms. Consolidate everything, centralize manufacturing, build one industrial backbone capable of serving every name in the portfolio simultaneously. Shared movements, shared components. One company making the hairsprings that everyone needed. One company making the movements that most would run. In 1983, SSIH and ASUAG merged to form the SMH Group, later renamed the Swatch Group. Hayek took a stake and ran it. He was 55 years old and had never made a watch in his life. That detail matters. A watchmaker would have protected the craft. Hayek protected the industry. Those are not the same thing, and the difference explains everything that follows. The first public proof of concept was the Swatch itself, designed by engineers, not watchmakers. 51 components instead of the industry standard 90. Manufactured on automated lines. Retailed for under $50. Launched with the kind of aggressive, colorful marketing campaign that Swiss watchmakers had never attempted in 150 years of existence. It was a fashion object. It sold millions, then tens of millions. But the Swatch was never really about the Swatch. It was a demonstration that Swiss manufacturing could compete at scale if it stopped being romantic about scale. The real play was everything Hayek was quietly building underneath. And underneath is exactly where things get interesting, because the machine Hayek built runs deeper than most watch buyers ever look. The machine underneath. Most people who own a Swiss watch have no idea what actually makes it run, not in a mechanical sense. Most owners understand there's a movement inside, gears and springs, the whole ballet of tiny parts oscillating in rhythm. What they don't know is who made those parts. And the answer, for the majority of Swiss watches on the planet, is the same company, often the same factory, sometimes the same building. ETA SA is a Swatch Group subsidiary based in Grenchen, Switzerland. It's the largest movement manufacturer in the world, and for decades it supplied finished and semi-finished mechanical movements to essentially every Swiss brand in existence, including direct competitors of Swatch Group brands. When you bought an IWC in 2005, or a Tag Heuer in 2009, or an Oris in 2012, there was a very good chance the engine inside came from ETA. Longines ran on ETA movements. So did Mido. So did Tissot. The Swiss-made label on 100 different brand dials was, in many cases, one company's work being attributed to many different names. That alone would be interesting. But ETA is just the movement. There's something smaller and more critical underneath even that. The hairspring. If the movement is the heart of a mechanical watch, the hairspring is the nerve. It's the tiny coiled spring, genuinely thinner than a human hair, that controls the oscillation of the balance wheel, which is the mechanism that regulates accuracy. Without a consistent, perfectly made hairspring, everything else is irrelevant. The most expensive movement, the most precise finishing, the most elaborate complication, all worthless if the hairspring is off. Making hairsprings well is one of the most technically demanding tasks in precision manufacturing. The metallurgy has to be exact. The dimensions have to be consistent across millions of units. The spring has to behave identically at -10 degrees and at +40 degrees in magnetic fields after a drop, after 30 years of daily winding. Achieving that consistency at scale requires equipment, expertise, and institutional knowledge that takes generations to build. Niverox Phare is a Swatch Group subsidiary based in Le Locle, Switzerland. Its name comes from the French, ni variable, ni oxydable, meaning neither variable nor oxidizable. It was founded in 1934 by Reinhard Straumann, who spent his career developing alloys that could maintain consistent mechanical properties under every condition a watch might encounter. Swatch Group acquired Niverox Phare as part of the 1983 consolidation. And in doing so, they acquired something that no other company in watchmaking has fully replicated. They now have the ability to produce hairsprings at scale, at the quality level required by serious horology, at a price the industry could absorb. Niverox Phare supplies more than 90% of the hairsprings used in Swiss watchmaking. That number isn't a rough estimate. It's been cited in antitrust filings, in trade publications, and in watch forum discussions going back 15 years. Patek Philippe uses Niverox hairsprings. Jaeger-LeCoultre uses them. Audemars Piguet developed a new material called Nivacron in collaboration with Niverox Phare itself in 2018. The companies that competed fiercely at every other level, from movement design to case construction to marketing, were all quietly sharing the same heartbeat. The German alternatives exist. Karl Haas in Dusseldorf makes hairsprings. They're capable and reputable. They cost roughly 10 times what Niverox charges. That differential doesn't work for most brands unless you're selling at a price point where you can bury it in the margin. Most can't. So the industry did what industries do when a dependency is uncomfortable and the alternative is expensive. They kept the dependency and stopped talking about it publicly. But here's what changed. Starting in 2002, Swatch Group began announcing it would gradually restrict ETA movement supply to outside brands. Brands that had been buying ETA movements for 20 years suddenly had to plan for a world where that supply dried up. The Swiss Competition Authority got involved. Legal battles followed. The industry spent most of a decade negotiating supply agreements, building alternative movement makers, and quietly scrambling And through all of it, the hairspring supply remained untouched. Because nobody had a real answer for the hairspring. You can retool a movement factory. You can't easily retool generations of metallurgical expertise. Nivarox kept supplying. The dependency deepened even as the movement supply became more diversified. The industry solved the visible problem and left the invisible one in place. So that's the infrastructure. One factory for movements, one factory for hairsprings, both owned by the same group. Now look at the names on the dials that depend on them. Before we move on, which brands do you own? The portfolio. Same blood, different stories. Here is the Swatch Group portfolio. Sit with this. At the base, Flick Flack, children's watches. Learning to Tell Time, rubber straps, $30 to $50. Then Swatch, the plastic fashion watch that started the rescue, $50 to $200, depending on the collaboration. Then Certina, then Mido, underrated, a label that quietly delivers more than its price tag suggests. Then Hamilton, American founded in Lancaster, Pennsylvania in 1892, Swiss manufactured since the 70s, beloved by pilots and by every film director who's ever needed a watch that looks serious without looking ostentatious. Hamilton supplied watches to the US military in both world wars. The watch worn by Matthew McConaughey in Interstellar is a Hamilton Murph. That heritage is real. Then Tissot, the volume leader. More than 1 million watches per year. The name that crossed $100 million in United States sales for the first time in 2024. For many buyers, Tissot is the entry point to Swiss watchmaking, the first mechanical watch. The first time a dial says Swiss made, and it means something personal. Tissot takes that position seriously. They're also the name that most clearly illustrates the shared infrastructure, because the Powermatic 80 movement inside the current PRX and T Classic lines is engineered for the factory, not for the independent watchmaker. 80-hour power reserve. Laser-regulated accuracy. No traditional regulator arm. Excellent out of the box. A different conversation when it's time for service in 15 years. Remember that detail. We'll come back to it. Then Rado, ceramic cases and bold geometric design. Then Longines, the sweet spot where Swiss craft becomes genuinely aspirational without requiring financial sacrifice. Longines has been making watches since 1832. They've timed more Olympic events than any other brand on Earth. The elegance in their product line isn't marketing, it's institutional knowledge that simply takes a long time to develop. Then Omega. There's not much to say about Omega that the moon landing, James Bond, and 4 generations of loyal customers haven't already said. The coaxial escapement, developed by George Daniels and adapted for mass production with Nivarox Far's involvement, is a legitimate mechanical innovation, not just marketing. And then the Summit. Blancpain, founded 1735. Blancpain claims to be the oldest watch manufacturer still in continuous production, and the historical record supports that claim. The 50 Fathoms was the first serious purpose-built dive watch. The Grande Double Sonnerie unveiled in 2025 includes a retrograde perpetual calendar, a flying tourbillon, and a minute repeater. That's not a watch. That's an argument about what human hands are capable of building at a small scale. Breguet, founded 1775. Abraham Louis Breguet invented the tourbillon. He invented the parachute shock protection system. He invented the Breguet overcoil, which improves hairspring isochronism and is still used by manufacturers across the industry 250 years later. He invented the self-winding mechanism. Napoleon Bonaparte owned his watches. Marie Antoinette commissioned one that took 44 years to complete. Breguet's 2025 Classique subscription won the Grand Prix de Horlogerie de Genève, the highest award in watchmaking. One corporation, from a child's rubber watch to the most complicated manufactured objects in the history of the craft, under one roof, with shared machinery running through all of it. Honestly, I'm not sure I buy the all made the same way framing completely. The objects at the top genuinely aren't the same as the objects at the bottom, but the infrastructure underneath them is the same. That distinction matters, and we'll come back to it. The machine that runs all of this was built for one specific thing: volume. And volume, by 2025, was exactly what it wasn't getting. The machine gets hungry. Hayek's industrial architecture was designed for a specific output level. The factories, the tooling, the workforce, all of it calibrated around a volume that made the economics work. The problem with that kind of industrial commitment is you can't simply dial it down. The skilled workers who produce movements, who pair hairsprings with balance wheels by hand, because consistency at that scale still requires human judgment at key points. They took decades to train. You lose them once, they're gone permanently. The institutional knowledge walks out with each redundancy. It doesn't come back. So the family logic. And it is a family. Nayla Hayek chairs the board. Her brother Mark leads the executive team. Their father's philosophy still runs the company, was to absorb the losses rather than dismantle the capacity. Keep running. Keep everyone employed. Take the pain on the balance sheet rather than in the workforce. But the world didn't cooperate. China, which had been an engine of Swiss watch consumption through the 2010s, went cold. Not completely, not permanently, but decisively enough to matter. The conspicuous luxury spending that drove explosive Chinese growth through the previous decade ran into a different cultural moment. Post-pandemic consumer habits shifted globally, and sitting underneath all of this, quietly gaining in exactly the price range where Tissot, Mido, and Certina compete most directly: the smartwatch. The quartz crisis had a descendant. It doesn't come from Japan this time. It comes from Cupertino, California. The Apple Watch alone sells roughly 50 million units per year, more than the entire Swiss watch industry combined, which exported around 14.5 million pieces in 2025. At the $200 to $500 price point, where Tissot does its heaviest volume, the Apple Watch is a direct competitor. It tracks your health, answers your phone, tells the time to the second, and doesn't need a service appointment. The factories needed a number. The number wasn't there. And in January 2026, they stopped being able to hide what that had cost them. 2025, the year the numbers told the truth. In January 2026, Swatch Group published its 2025 annual results. Net profit, 25 million Swiss francs, down from 219 million Swiss francs in 2024. That's an 89% collapse in a single financial year. Not a bad quarter. Not a one-time write-off. An 89% collapse in net profit on 6.28 billion Swiss francs in revenue. Operating profit in the production segment, ETA, Nivarox, and the entire manufacturing backbone finished the year negative. The factories weren't just losing margin, they were operationally underwater. The full-year net margin, 0.4%. Nayla Hayek called the market schizophrenic. She wasn't using the word carelessly. December 2025 was the best single month in Harry Winston's history. The Americas posted nearly 20% local currency growth for the full year. India, the Middle East, Poland, and Mexico all delivered double-digit growth. Omega's fourth-generation Seamaster Planet Ocean launched to strong reception. Breguet's anniversary year generated genuine collector excitement. The top of the portfolio was performing. The middle, where the machines run all day and the volumes justify the infrastructure, was not. And the production segment that serves the entire group, that makes the movements, that makes the hairsprings, that supplies every component Breguet and Omega and Blancpain depend on, finished the year with an operating loss. Did you know Tissot, Mido, and Certina share the same movement architecture? Yes or no? Drop it in the comments. This is the paradox Hayek built. The prestige brands can't carry the factory. Breguet sells perhaps 5,000 watches in a good year. Blancpain fewer. At that volume, even at those prices, you can't justify the fixed costs of ETA and Nivarox. The volume comes from Tissot and Hamilton and Longines and Mido. The mid-tier labels are the ones generating the throughput that makes the entire industrial system economically viable. When the mid-tier slows, everything strains at once. But the profit collapse was only part of what 2025 and early 2026 revealed. The hairspring story got quietly stranger at the same time, the chokehold nobody talks about. While the financial results were absorbing the industry's attention, the hairspring situation was getting quietly stranger. The Swiss Competition Commission, Comco, had been watching the Nivarox dependency for years. In 2002, when Swatch Group announced it would begin restricting ETA movement supply to outside brands. The commission stepped in. The process took more than a decade. By 2019, ETA was no longer required to sell mechanical movements to outside companies. The Nivarox deadline was 2023. After that, the Commission's supply requirement expired. Sellita and Soprod expanded to fill the movement gap. By 2020, brands that had run ETA movements for 20 years had migrated to Sellita's SW200 and SW300 calibers, functionally equivalent, similar specifications. The transition worked. The industry adapted. The hairspring transition is different. Sellita's own movements still run on Nivarox hairsprings. You can buy a non-Swatch movement for your non-Swatch brand and still have Swatch Group regulating its accuracy. The dependency didn't go away. It just moved one layer deeper. Go on Watch You Seek or Watch Crunch and search Nivarox Monopoly. You'll find threads going back to 2012 where experienced collectors, watchmakers, and industry insiders are working through exactly this problem. The consensus that emerges from those discussions is not that Nivarox is bad. It's that no one who relies on Nivarox is truly independent. And that distinction becomes uncomfortable when the company supplying your most critical component is also your biggest competitor in the market. One post from a thread on Watch You Seek sums it up better than any analyst report. The fact that extremely competent and well-capitalized companies like Minerva, Lange, and JLC are still on the learning curve for hairspring production demonstrates just how difficult this is to do well. That was written in 2013. The situation hasn't materially changed. Rolex looked at this structure in the early 2000s and decided they didn't want to participate in it. They spent years developing a proprietary hairspring alloy from scratch, niobium and zirconium, with traces of titanium and vanadium. The development hit unexpected complications. The alloy's surface oxidized inconsistently without an additional anodizing step, which required an entire additional manufacturing stage they hadn't budgeted for. They built that stage. The resulting hairspring is anodized blue, the Parachrom blue, and it became one of the subtle marks of Rolex's genuine independence from the industry's shared infrastructure. The color isn't decorative, it's proof of a process. It's Rolex saying, "We solved a problem nobody else bothered to solve." Ulysse Nardin took a different route. They developed their own hairsprings through a company called Sigatech for their in-house caliber, H. Moser and C developed their own. These are the exceptions, not the rule. And they're exceptions that required both serious capital and a willingness to accept that the development might take longer than planned and cost more than projected. What Rolex, Moser, and Ulysse Nardin built took years, significant capital, and institutional R&D capability that most brands simply don't have. The reason most brands stayed on Nivarox isn't laziness. It's that building a genuine alternative is genuinely hard. And Nivarox springs are excellent. This isn't a story about a bad product. It's a story about structural concentration of power that the industry accepted because the alternative was painful and the status quo worked, until the status quo came under pressure. And then in March 2026, Swatch Group did something nobody expected. They stopped being quiet about it. Before we move on to the next part, let me tell you this. Most people don't realize this, but buying a watch the wrong way can cost you thousands, and you won't even notice it until it's too late. You walk into a store or browse online, and everything looks the same, but behind the scenes, there's a system. Prices aren't always fair, availability is controlled, and one bad decision can leave you overpaying for something that doesn't even hold its value. That's why I created a complete free insider guide to buying watches. Inside, you'll find the best watches to buy, the watches to avoid, and how to choose a watch that actually fits your style and budget long term. The goal is simple. I'll help you stop guessing and start buying smart. You'll find the free guide in the pinned comment and description. Now, let's move on to the next part. The letter that said the quiet part out loud. In March 2026, something unusual happened. Swatch Group published an open letter to Morgan Stanley. Not a private communication. A letter posted publicly on their corporate website, under a section specifically labeled open letters to Morgan Stanley. It challenged what the group characterized as negligent and inaccurate market analysis from the investment bank and the consultancy Lux Consult. It was direct. It named names. It disputed specific characterizations of the group's market position. Companies don't do this. Corporations the size of Swatch Group have legal teams, investor relations departments, and established channels for disputing analyst reports. None of those channels involve publishing a labeled open letter to a named bank on your corporate website for the entire industry to read. When a company that large, with that much institutional discipline, takes that step, it tells you something about the internal pressure building behind the composure. The same month, Italian antitrust authorities launched an investigation involving Swatch Group and alleged price maintenance practices around Tissot and Mito at the retail level. The investigation examined whether the group was taking steps to prevent retailers from discounting inventory rather than letting the market clear it at lower prices. If you're sitting on excess stock, your retailers want to discount it to move it, and your response is to prevent them from doing so. That's not brand protection. That's inventory crisis management. Put all of that together, the monopoly, the losses, the open letter, the investigation, and a picture emerges that most watch coverage simply refuses to name directly what Hayek actually built. Here's the observation nobody quite says directly. Nicholas Hayek didn't build a watch company. He built a watch state. It has its own currency, the Swiss-made label, which Hayek fought for decades to protect and tighten precisely because it was the source of all the portfolio's value. Strip that label of meaning, and you strip the pricing power from Tissot and Longines and Omega simultaneously. It has its own central infrastructure, ETA and Niverox, the movement factory, and the hairspring plant. These are the functional equivalents of a power grid and a monetary system. They don't just supply the group's own brands. They supply the conditions under which Swiss watchmaking operates at all. It has its own class hierarchy, the tiers, from Flic-Flac to Breguet, each occupying a defined position that's carefully maintained and never allowed to blur into the tier below it. And like any state, it has a structural vulnerability built into the design that only becomes visible under stress. The industrial architecture that saved Swiss watchmaking from quartz depends on throughput, not profit margin at the top. The prestige brands produce small numbers at high prices. Those economics can absorb a difficult year. It needs volume in the middle, where the machines run continuously, and the unit costs justify the fixed infrastructure. Remove that volume, and everything gets stressed at once. The factories lose margin. The component supply that serves the outside industry starts raising uncomfortable questions. The retailers sit on watches they can't move, and the company controlling 90% of an industry's critical component is running at a fraction of its designed capacity. Hayek built the rescue so completely that the rescue became the dependency. The solution to one problem, Swiss watchmaking's inability to compete with quartz industrialization, contained the seed of a different problem. A concentration of power that functions brilliantly when the machine runs full, and strains everything simultaneously when it doesn't. That's not failure. That's the oldest story in the industry. The brilliant solution eventually becomes the constraint the next generation has to solve. What this means when you're buying. This is the part the watch media tends to skip, because the practical implications for buyers are real, and saying them plainly makes certain brands uncomfortable. Picture the person who walked into a Tissot boutique in 2022 and bought a PRX Powermatic 80. They'd saved for it. First real mechanical watch. Paid around $700. Walked out feeling like they'd made a considered quality decision. The watch is beautiful, genuinely beautiful. The integrated bracelet, the 70s design revival, the Swiss-made caseback, all of it real. In 10 years, that watch needs a service. And at that point, they're going to discover what laser regulation means for their options. A traditional watchmaker can't adjust the regulation the way they'd adjust a standard movement. There's no regulator arm to turn. The Swatch Group's practical solution is movement swap. A fresh Powermatic 80 goes in, the old one goes out. Efficient, clean, done in a week. It also means that specific watch, with its specific history, is functionally gone. You get a functional equivalent back. This isn't a conspiracy. It's what the industrial model produces when applied to service. The factory optimizes for consistency, not continuity. That's a legitimate design choice. It just isn't the choice most buyers think they're making when they purchase a Swiss mechanical watch. There's also a longer-term question worth sitting with. Independent watch repair, the kind that keeps a 1970s Omega Seamaster running perfectly in 2025, depends on movement architectures that trained hands can work on without manufacturer involvement. Traditional ETA movements, the 2000, 824, the 2000, 892, have been serviced by independent watchmakers around the world for 50 years. Parts exist. Manuals exist. The knowledge base exists. A laser-regulated movement engineered for factory service is a different proposition. Whether that service model exists in the same form in 2050 is genuinely unknown. So is the parts supply. None of this is unique to Swatch Group. It's a systemic shift in what watch ownership means as manufacturing becomes more industrial across the board. But Swatch Group is the largest and most visible example of it. At the top of the portfolio, the picture is entirely different. A Blancpain movement goes back to Le Brassus. Specialists who know those calibers intimately strip it down, examine every component under magnification, replace what needs replacing, finish what needs finishing, and send it back. That service is real. The craft behind it is real. And because those movements use traditional regulation, an independent watchmaker with the right skills can service one in 2050 without manufacturer involvement at all. That's what mechanical heritage actually means for the owner. Not the story on the box, but the options available when the watch needs attention. The question worth sitting with before your next purchase isn't whether the Swatch Group makes good watches. They do. The question is which story you're actually paying for, and whether the version of Swiss watchmaking being sold at each price tier is doing the same amount of work the label implies. Because the label is the same at every tier. Swiss made. Same font. Same promise. But beneath the dial at $700 and beneath the dial at $20,000, the answer to what does this watch become in 30 years is not the same answer. The Swatch Group will probably recover. The second half of 2025 showed momentum. January 2026 continued positive across all segments. Management is confident about 2026. They may well be right, but probably recovers and everything you were told about luxury are two different conversations. The system Hayek built saved an entire industry. It also concentrated power in ways that nobody fully mapped when the machine was running perfectly. 90% of Swiss watchmakers, depending on one company's hairsprings. 16 brands occupying different price points, but sharing the same industrial bloodline underneath. A cost structure that requires specific volume at specific price tiers to function as designed. In 2025, that cost structure showed what it looks like under pressure. The 89% profit decline wasn't a blip, it was a revelation. The machine isn't broken, but for the first time in decades, you could see exactly how it works. And once you see it, the Swiss-made label does something slightly different in your hand. Think about what that label used to mean to someone who didn't know any of this. A guarantee of independent craft. A promise that somewhere in Switzerland, someone who cared deeply about watchmaking had built this object specifically. That's the story the label carries. That's what the price premium is buying. The reality is more complicated. Some of that story is true at every tier. Some of it is true only at the top. And the shared infrastructure that makes the rest possible is run by one company, built by one man, managed by one family, and dependent on volume levels that 2025 proved are not guaranteed. That's worth knowing before you buy. The watch industry has always sold stories alongside objects. The story at $700 and the story at $20,000 are genuinely different stories. Knowing which one you're paying for is the only way to make the decision on your own terms. The craft at the top is still real. The movements still run. Breguet genuinely did invent the tourbillon. Blancpain genuinely made the first dive watch. Omega genuinely went to the moon. But the story of the independent Swiss watchmaker, the solitary craftsman, the heritage workshop with its own soul and its own supply chain, That story has been running on the same shared machinery for more than 40 years. In 2025, that machinery told you what it costs to keep that story alive. What does your Swiss watch mean to you now that you know this? Let me know in the comments. Also, hit the like button and subscribe for more.